the Veiled Conqueror, Aegon I and the Untold Truths of Westeros. One man, two sisters, three dragons. Seems simple, doesn't it? Aegon's conquest was much more than brute force. Do you know what prophecy truly propelled Aegon? And what was the role of a terrible burden in consolidating a realm destined to withstand an endless night? We will now delve into the whispers of a story that transcends mere ambition. In the heart of the world, in times immemorial, stood Valyria, a free city, an empire of unparalleled splendor and magic. Its streets were paved with molten gold. Its buildings rose to the heavens in graceful and unthinkable architecture. Its arches floated effortlessly, defying gravity. Valyria was the cradle of the Dragon Lords, an elite of sorcerers and warriors who tamed the world's most fearsome beasts, the dragons. They walked upon the earth like gods, their power forged in fire and blood, their lives intertwined with the winged creatures that were both mounts and extensions of their own souls. The noble houses of Valyria numbered 40, each with its own right to dominate the skies and the land. House Targaryen, though they were dragon lords and possessed the right to ascend the backs of these majestic beasts, were not among the most prominent of the 40 families. They were considered minor, a more discreet lineage, their power less vast, their lands not as extensive as those of the Valerians or Celtigars, other houses of Valyrian blood who preferred the vastness of the sea. Still, the Targaryens guarded a secret that manifested through dreams, a gift that proved to be salvation when the rest of the Valyrian world fell to ashes. It was a young Targaryen, Daenerys, known as the Dreamer, who received the vision. 112 years before, the cataclysm known as the Doom of Valyria, Daenerys saw the ruin. She saw Valyria tearing itself apart, swallowed by a fire that would not be extinguished, a calamity that would wipe off the map the greatest and proudest civilization the world had ever known. Her vision was clear and terrifying, as real as in the blood in her veins. Her father, Aegon Targaryen, had the wisdom and courage to believe his daughter. In an era of arrogance and blind confidence, Aegon did the unthinkable. He sold all his possessions in Valyria, dismantled his vast estates, and ignoring the scorn and contempt of the other great houses, sailed his family and his 5 dragons to the safety of Dragonstone. Dragonstone, a rocky volcanic island in the narrow sea, an outpost that seemed a dark and desolate place compared to the grandeur of Valyria. The other dragon lords scoffed. They considered Aegon a fool, a coward who abandoned his heritage and glory for a mere girl's dream. But history, as we know, revealed the truth. And then the doom came. The cataclysm was so overwhelming that even the greatest sages of Westeros cannot fully comprehend its true nature to this day. It was hell on earth. Volcanoes erupted, rivers of fire devoured cities, the sky darkened with ash and smoke, mountains rose and sank into the sea, the very ground opened up, and the great Valyrian cities were swallowed. Their glories turned into bubbling acid lakes and desolation. Of all Valyria's glory and power, only House Targaryen survived, isolated and protected on Dragonstone. The dark stone island rose from the sea like a silent sentinel, a solitary reminder of a world gone by. It was in this environment of isolation, with the memory of the doom still fresh in his family's mind, and with an unparalleled heritage of power and dragons, that Aegon Targaryen grew up. He did not know the decadent grandeur of Valyria. He knew the harsh reality of a family that was the last and only lineage of dragon lords, with the responsibility of keeping that heritage alive. His home was not a palace in Valyria, but the austere fortress of Dragonstone, with its dragons carved into the stone and its air of ancient magic. Aegon was shaped by this heritage. From childhood, he was trained in the arts of war, politics, and above all, the mastery of dragons. He learned to fly Balerion, the Black Dread, from an early age. Balerion, the Black Dread, was the largest and oldest of the Targaryen dragons, whose wings cast shadows as vast as those of an entire castle. The bond between Aegon and Balerion was deep, almost mystical, a connection that transcended mere mount and rider. It was a union of souls, forged in fire and history. His family ties were with his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. It was not just a bond of love, but of shared destiny, forged in the uniqueness of their existence. Visenya, the elder, was the warrior, the strategist. Her dragon was Vhagar, a monster of fire and fury, only slightly smaller than Balerion. Visenya was stern, disciplined, with an austere beauty and a sharp sword. She was the family's blade and shield, the pillar of pragmatism. Rhaenys, the younger, was the adventurer, the enchanter. Her dragon was Meraxes, swift and graceful, with silvery scales that gleamed in the sun and a bright white fire. Rhaenys was more given to music, beauty, and diplomacy. Her nature was warmer, more impulsive, but no less determined. She was the family's voice and heart, capable of captivating and persuading where brute force failed. They were a triangle of power, temperament, and destiny, each complementing the other, each essential to the purpose Aegon was destined to fulfill. During the years leading up to the conquest, Aegon was not an idle ruler. He was a leader on Dragonstone, attentive to events in Westeros. The Seven Kingdoms, fragmented and in constant conflict, were an endless battlefield. Kings warred against kings, lords against lords. No lasting peace seemed possible. Aegon observed this division, this perpetual bleeding, and a profound certainty settled in his soul. A certainty that was not just that of a dragon lord seeking to expand his dominion, but that of a man burdened by a revelation. Here lies the untold truth, the secret few songs dare to whisper. Aegon's deepest motivation was not the crown for the crown, nor power for power's sake. It was the icy echo of an ancient prophecy, a burden he carried in silence, a terrible song that resonated in his dreams. It was the song of ice and fire. Aegon Targaryen, like his ancestor Daenerys, was a dreamer. Not a dreamer of conquests and empty glory, but a dreamer of terror. He saw apocalyptic visions in his dreams. He saw an overwhelming darkness coming from the north, a cold that would freeze bones and consume all life, an endless night that would swallow the world of the living. He saw an army of the dead, tireless and soulless, marching over disunited lands. The prophecy of the Song of Ice and Fire spoke of a threat that could only be faced by a prince or princess, a Targaryen heir, with dragon blood running in their veins, capable of uniting men and kingdoms for the final confrontation. It was a vision of the end of everything, the end of the world he knew and loved. Aegon believed, with unwavering conviction, that for Westeros to survive, he needed to unite it under a single ruler, under the dominion of dragons, so that the realm would be strong, cohesive, and prepared when the long night finally arrived. The time of division and constant war between kingdoms had to end, so that humanity would have a chance. This was Aegon's secret motivation, not just a desire for an iron throne, but the weight of a world on his shoulders, the shadow of an endless winter. He shared this vision, this terrible prophecy, with his sister wives, not in a public court, but in quiet conversations on the dark stone of Dragonstone, under the moonlight and the murmur of the sea. Visenya, with her sharp pragmatism and her understanding of the need for force, understood the urgency of unity. She saw the logic behind the necessary brutality. Rhaenys, with her faith in dreams, magic, and connection to the supernatural, grasped the gravity of the prophecy and the urgency of its call. They not only believed what Aegon told them, they felt the same responsibility. This prophecy, this shared burden, made the conquest more than an act of ambition. It became an act of necessity. Aegon was not just taking what he desired, he was fulfilling what he believed was his destiny, in order to save a world that did not even know it needed saving. He was the veiled conqueror, a man whose public actions were merely the tip of an iceberg of a much deeper and more frightening motivation. And with this secret motivation, he prepared for the greatest undertaking of his life, one that would echo for millennia. Westeros, at the dawn of the year of the conquest, was a continent of wild and proud contrasts. To the north, the Starks, lords of winter, ruled a vast and icy realm, loyal to their old gods and to their kings who had sat on the winter throne for thousands of years. Their fortresses were ancient, their souls hardened by the cold. South of the Neck, in the Westerlands, the Lannisters, kings of Casterly Rock, prided themselves on their unparalleled wealth, forged in gold and intrigue. Their swords were sharp, their words even more so. In the Reach, the Gardeners, kings of the Reach, were lords of fertile land and numerous people. Their power derived from the richness of their soil and their thousands of knights. They were considered the noblest and wealthiest of the great houses. In the Stormlands, King Argilac the Arrogant, the last Storm King, was a legendary warrior, a man whose veins burned with the fire of battle. His castle, Storm's End, was an impenetrable fortress, built to withstand the fury of the sea and winds. In the Vale, the Arryns, kings of the Vale, ruled from their eyrie, a fortress carved into the mountain, accessible only by treacherous trails, a natural barrier against any invader. The Iron Islands, rocky and unforgiving, were the dominion of the kings of the Iron Islands and the Trident, whose power was naval and whose wars were the most brutal, based on reaving and blood. And south of everything, Dorne, a realm of deserts and mountains, ruled by the Martells, who refused to bow to any external power, their freedom forged in millennia of resistance. It was a mosaic of warring kingdoms, an endless battlefield, where blood was spilled for land, glory, or simple enmity. None of these kings imagined that peace, if it could even be called peace, would come not by the sword of another king, but by the shadow of a dragon wing. Aegon's message, when it reached them, was clear and audacious, but also laden with an underlying promise of unity. He did not just demand surrender, he promised a realm. His letter, with the three-headed dragon seal, was simple. There is only one king in Westeros, and it is to me that you shall swear allegiance. Those who bow to my will keep their lands and titles, and will be my vassals. Those who refuse will be crushed, and the crowns of those who oppose me will be melted to forge my iron throne. The initial response was incredulity, followed by laughter and contempt. Who was this Lord of Dragonstone, a mere remnant of lost glory with 3 dragons, to challenge kings who had reigned for thousands of years? Argilac the Arrogant, king of the storm, sent Aegon the hands of his herald and declared that Aegon was a king of nothing more than a rocky island. Their arrogance would be their undoing. Aegon, however, did not wait for invitations or acceptance. He was not a king of empty words. He landed with a small but experienced army and his sisters at a strategic point at the mouth of the Blackwater River. There, he ordered the construction of a simple fortification, the Aegon Fort, which would one day become the imposing and populous city of King's Landing, the heart of the realm. It was at this location, in front of his new fortress, that Aegon planted his banner, the 3-headed dragon of the Targaryens on a black field, and it was here that he proclaimed himself king of Westeros, the first of his dynasty. The audacity of his gesture echoed through the realms. Fear, true fear, was yet to come. The conquest was not just about brute power. It was about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each kingdom, and the unique role each of Aegon's sisters would play. Visenya, the elder, was the embodiment of relentless force, of cold and calculating military strategy. She rode Vhagar, a dragon as ancient and fierce as Balerion, though slightly smaller in size. Vhagar's presence alone was a threat. Visenya did not hesitate to use force to ensure submission. Her nature was harsh, her beauty austere, her sword, dark sister, a Valyrian steel blade, was an extension of her will. She was the sharp blade of the conquest, the one who ensured that Aegon's orders were carried out, no matter the human or material cost. She was justice in flames, the one who left no doubt about Targaryen power. A clear example of her action occurred at Harrenhal, the fortress that Harren the Black, king of the Iron Islands and the Trident, had built at the cost of lives and suffering for decades. Harrenhal was the largest and most imposing fortress in Westeros, a monument to his arrogance. Impregnable, they said. Its walls were so thick that no catapult could break them, its towers so high that no army could scale them. Harren boasted that his castle would never fall. But he did not count on a dragon. Aegon, aboard Balerion, hovered over Harrenhal. Balerion's shadow covered the entire castle. He offered Harren one last chance to surrender. Harren, in his arrogance, refused, sealing himself inside his unbreakable stone walls. And then, hell rained down from the sky. Balerion, with his black and intense flame, heated the stones of Harrenhal until they glowed red, until they began to melt like wax. The men inside the walls were cooked in their own armor, their screams silenced by the infernal heat and dense smoke. The towers, which once defied the sky, crumbled in a cascade of stone and fire. Harren and his entire lineage died there, inside his impregnable fortress, which became a blazing tomb, a monument to the futility of resistance against dragon power. Harrenhal became a lesson, a warning etched in the melted rocks. Against a dragon, there are no walls. Visenya's action in this confrontation, hovering on Vhagar, ensuring the annihilation, demonstrated her capacity for ruthless execution, her coldness in the face of the destruction necessary for Aegon's greater goal. She was living proof that Aegon's clemency had limits, and that resistance would be met with absolute force. Rhaenys, on the other hand, was the embodiment of diplomacy, grace, and beauty. Her dragon, Meraxes, was smaller than Balerion and Vhagar, but no less deadly, with silvery scales that shimmered in the sun and a bright white fire that seemed to dance in the air. Rhaenys did not seek battle first. She sought the hearts of men, surrender through logic, through the benefit of unity, through subtle awe. Her presence aboard Meraxes was enough to inspire awe and respect, but her smile, her gentle voice, her charm, and her understanding of human nature were the most effective tools to ensure lasting loyalty. She complemented Aegon and Visenya in an essential way, smoothing out rough edges, building bridges where her siblings' strength might have created walls. When Aegon established his initial dominion, he did not merely demand surrender. He offered peace, protection, a unified realm where the constant wars between kingdoms would be a thing of the past, where trade would flourish and life could be lived without the constant fear of a neighboring attack. And it was Rhaenys who often carried this message, flying Meraxes over castles, not to threaten with fire, but to persuade with promises of a better future. One of the most notable examples of her diplomacy was with House Arryn of the Vale. As Aegon and his sisters advanced, the Queen Regent of the Vale, Shara Arryn, a woman of renowned pride and beauty, prepared her defenses. She gathered her armies at the Gates of the Moon, the entrance fortress to the Vale, and declared that no Targaryen would ever pass. But Rhaenys did not attack the gate. She flew directly to the Eyrie, the impregnable fortress of House Arryn, a castle carved into the mountain, considered inaccessible to any army. She landed Meraxes in the courtyard of the Eyrie before Queen Shara and her young son, Rhaenhal Arryn. There, Rhaenys did not threaten, did not demand. She spoke with the queen, talked about the future, about the destiny that awaited those who opposed the dragons, about the futility of resistance and the promise of a stronger realm. Rhaenhal, the young lord, fascinated by the dragon's majesty, asked to ride Meraxes. Rhaenys, with her gentle touch and a smile, allowed it. And as the young lord flew through the skies on the dragon, seeing the world from above and feeling the wind on his face, he understood the true scale of Aegon's power and the futility of resistance. Queen Shara, seeing her son's fascination and acceptance and the impossibility of resisting such power and charm, laid down her son's crowns and swore allegiance to Aegon. It was a bloodless victory, a triumph of persuasion over force, a hallmark of Rhaenys' unique approach. Her influence extended beyond the conquest. Rhaenys played a fundamental role in establishing the court in King's Landing. She was the one who brought entertainment, music, and beauty to the new realm. She encouraged bards, artists, and merchants. She helped weave the social tapestry of the new Targaryen reign, building bridges and alliances where Visenya, perhaps, would have built walls of fear. This duality between the sisters was one of Aegon's great assets, a deep understanding that conquest was not just about military power, but about consolidation through justice, wisdom, and indeed, the art of governing and persuading. a delicate balance between fury and grace, fire and charm. The culmination of the conquest came at the Field of Fire. It was there that the true face of dragon power was revealed in its terrifying and absolute fullness. The last great armies of Westeros, the combined might of the Reach and the Westerlands, under the command of King Mern the Might, Gardner and King Loren Lannister, united to crush the invading Targaryens. There were 55,000 men, including Westeros' heaviest and most formidable cavalry, an overwhelming force in numbers. The battlefield, a vast open and flat space, seemed ideal for their cavalry and infantry, where they could use their numerical superiority. But Aegon was no ordinary general. He had dragons, and not just his Balerion. He had Visenya on Vhagar and Rhaenys on Meraxes. The three dragons swooped down on the Lannister and Gardner army like a plague of fire and fury. It was not a conventional ground battle. It was hell descended from the sky. The dry grass of the field ignited in seconds, turning the battle into a blazing inferno. Men and horses were consumed by the flames, their armor melting on their bodies, their screams silenced by the infernal heat and the thunderous roar of the dragons. It was a massacre, not a battle. The dragons burned and bit. Their roars were the sound of death itself. Panic spread like wildfire, and the discipline of the great hosts dissolved into a chaos of flesh and fire. Thousands died in minutes. The dense smoke and the smell of burning flesh hung over the field, a testament to the terror. King Mern Nindert Gardner and his entire lineage were annihilated, ending a 1,000-year dynasty, their bodies unrecognizable among the ashes. King Loren Lannister, seeing the futility of fighting against such terror and the impending annihilation, threw down his sword and knelt. He surrendered to Aegon, saving his house from extinction and becoming the first Lord of Casterly Rock under Targaryen rule. His surrender was an act of pragmatism, born of pure terror. The Field of Fire, a name that echoes the horror of a generation and forever marked in history, marked the end of organized resistance in Westeros. It was a turning point, an unequivocal demonstration that the power of dragons was supreme, and that the era of independent kingdoms had come to an end. The Targaryen conquest was not just a matter of victories, but of a complete paradigm shift. The fear of dragons and the recognition of their supremacy swept the continent like the fire that swept the Field of Fire. After the overwhelming victory, most of the great lords of Westeros surrendered. Aegon had broken the backbone of military resistance. The North, with its ancient honor and austere people, was the next to submit. Torch Stark, the king of the North, known as the King Who Knelt, marched his army to face Aegon. But when he saw the three dragons in the sky, hovering like gods above his army, and the lesson of Harrenhal and the Field of Fire still fresh, in his mind and in the whispers of his men, he knelt. He laid down his crown as King of Winter and swore allegiance to Aegon, becoming the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. It was an act of wisdom which spared his people from a terrible fate. This bloodless submission, coming from the proud and stubborn men of the North, was a symbol of the consolidation of Targaryen power, a recognition that the new era had arrived. With Westeros essentially unified, and the kings having bent the knee, Aegon turned his attention to building a symbol of his new reign, the Iron Throne. It was not a throne of gold or jewels, as many might expect from a conqueror who now ruled a continent. It was a throne of blades, forged from the swords of his enemies, of the kings who had surrendered. 1,000 swords, the songs and maesters, say, melted by the fire of Balerion, the Black Dread himself, and then carefully welded and shaped into a massive, imposing, asymmetrical, and uncomfortable chair. Aegon's intention with the Iron Throne was clear. He did not want a seat of comfort or ostentation. He did not want the softness of velvet or the gleam of precious stones. He wanted a throne that would remind everyone, including the king himself who sat upon it, the price of power and the responsibilities it carried. The sharp points and blades of the Iron Throne, they say, would prevent any king from sitting for too long without injuring himself. It was a constant reminder that governing is a heavy burden, a duty that requires constant vigilance, personal sacrifice, and at times necessary cruelty. It was a throne that allowed neither comfort nor complacency. The Iron Throne became the heart of the new realm, the center of power. And around it, the city of King's Landing began to grow, a physical symbol of the unification of Westeros, built from the ashes of the old guard and the vision of a new dawn. But even with most of the continent under his control, Aegon knew that the conquest was not entirely complete. Dorne remained. Dorne was different. A realm of scorching deserts, rocky mountains, dry valleys, and swift, treacherous rivers. Its people, the Martells, were known for their fierce resistance, their indomitable pride, and their refusal to bow to any external power. Dorne had never been fully conquered by any neighboring kingdom throughout history. Aegon tried both approaches, fire and persuasion, force, with Visenya leading dragon attacks that burned castles and armies, turning lands to ash. Diplomacy, with Rhaenys trying to persuade Princess Maria Martell, a cunning and stubborn woman known as the Yellow Toad, to surrender. But Dorne did not yield. They did not offer large armies to be burned in open fields. They fought with guerrilla tactics, brutal desert ambushes, and the desert itself as their greatest ally, a relentless enemy to any invader. Aegon's military campaigns in Dorne were long and bloody, marked by frustration for the Targaryens, dragon against sand and resistance, a battle where brute force was not enough. And it was in Dorne that tragedy finally struck the Targaryens, a blow that proved that even the power of dragons had its limits and its prices. Rhaenys, the sweet, diplomatic, and adventurous Rhaenys, and her dragon Meraxes were shot down by a massive scorpion, a Dornish war machine that launched huge iron bolts. It was a devastating loss for Aegon and Visenya, a wound that never fully healed. Rhaenys' death made it clear that even with the dragon, victory was not guaranteed, and that conquest came at a terrible personal price, a pain that Aegon would carry for the rest of his days. He had sacrificed love, joy, companionship in the name of his great secret mission. Aegon withdrew from Dorne without a complete victory, but also without an overwhelming defeat. He established a peace agreement with the Martells, allowing them to keep their title of prince and princess instead of kings and queens, and to rule Dorne with greater autonomy than the other kingdoms. It was a partial victory, a pragmatic acceptance that some lands and some peoples cannot be subjugated by fire and blood alone, but require recognition of their sovereignty. Aegon's conquest was an overwhelming triumph, but Dorne remained a thorn in the side of the unified realm, a constant reminder that absolute power was an illusion. The reign of Aegon the Conqueror lasted for more than 30 years. These were years dedicated to consolidating his dominion, establishing laws that governed all kingdoms, and building the infrastructure of the new realm. He was a king who understood the need to unify not only by force, but by law and order. He traveled extensively throughout Westeros, not as a conqueror, but as a king. He listened to the lords and the common people, trying to understand the needs of his vast and diverse dominion. He created the small council, a body of wise and loyal advisors to help him govern. He laid the foundations of what would become the realm's complex bureaucracy, appointing his officers, collecting taxes, building roads. But even with the crown on his head and a continent united under his command, the weight of the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy never left him. Aegon knew that his conquest was not the end, but the beginning of a much longer and more dangerous journey. He had united the kingdoms for a greater purpose, so that they would be prepared for the coming of a threat that he, Aegon the Conqueror, had only glimpsed in his most terrible dreams. He saw his descendants, the lineage he had established, as the guardians of this promise, the only ones capable of facing the darkness that would one day come. Aegon's legacy is complex, multifaceted. He was an unparalleled warrior, a brilliant strategist, a visionary who saw beyond his own era. He forged Westeros into a single nation, ending centuries of civil war between kingdoms, bringing a peace that, though imposed by the fire of his dragons, was a much-needed peace. He created the Iron Throne, a symbol of power and responsibility, a constant reminder that governance is a heavy burden. But he was also a man who carried a secret, an icy vision of the apocalypse that shaped every one of his decisions. every action, every act of conquest. He believed that his conquest was the only way to ensure that Westeros, and perhaps the world, would have a chance against the darkness that would one day come from the north. This secret, this deep conviction, adds a layer of tragedy and heroism to his figure. He was not just an ambitious tyrant. He was a king who believed he was saving the world, not just conquering it. The story of Aegon Targaryen is more than just the story of a man who conquered a continent. It is the story of a man driven by destiny, by fear, by a promise made to himself and his ancestors. A promise of preparation, of unity, of fire, and blood against the ice that would come. And it was this secret promise, this whisper of an icy song, that echoed in their hearts and minds, that led them to risk everything, to sacrifice lives, to face the fury of kings and the terror of war, to build a kingdom that could one day withstand the endless night. The veiled conqueror had played his part, but the true test of his dynasty and the true threat to Westeros was still to come. Aegon's peace would not last forever. The fire and blood that united Westeros also contained the seeds of its own destruction. After the conquest, tragedy followed. Not that of winter, but one created by the Targaryens themselves, born of blind ambition and the failure to understand the true purpose of the dragon lineage. In the next episode of Whispers of Westeros, we will delve into the bloodiest and most devastating civil war in Westeros history, the Dance of the Dragons. Discover how dragons fought dragons, how family turned against family, and how the prophecy of Aegon the Conqueror was almost lost forever in the flames of a fraternal war that decimated the glory of House Targaryen. Prepare for the true meaning of blood against blood and the price of unchecked ambition.
I know you can hear me.